My name is Daniel Harris. Though people tend to call me whatever suits them, I'm not too fussy. I've been married to Rachel for 4 years, though we've chosen not to have children. The idea of sacrificing our independence for diaper duty doesn't sit well with either of us. Maybe we'll change our minds someday, but if I'm being honest, I wouldn't bet on it. Rachel and I come from tough neighborhoods, where struggling to get by was just the way of life. We lived only a few streets apart, but our worlds never collided until we were 18. It was at a college recruitment event, of all places where we finally crossed paths. Rachel stood out immediately. She had an air of confidence and determination that clearly paid off later in life, as she worked her way up to becoming a successful accountant and credit controller. Me? I wasn't cut out for classrooms or lectures. I dropped out of college before I could even earn a degree. What I lacked in academics, though, I made up for with sheer grit and an instinct for business. I started working young, cleaning stores and offices at just 15 years old. By 18, I was overseeing a team of 30 employees and managing contracts with some of the biggest names in the city. Rachel, meanwhile, was in search of her first real job. She approached my booth at the event with a boldness I'll never forget. After handing me her resume, she smirked and said, "I'm not interested in cleaning, but I think you'll want my phone number." She wasn't wrong. Before she'd even made it to the next booth, I called her and asked her out. That was the start of everything, and 4 years later, we were husband and wife. That chance meeting also landed Rachel a job in the purchasing department of Johnson Industries. She started at the bottom, but true to her nature, she climbed the ranks relentlessly. 8 years later, she was running both the purchasing and credit control departments. Her determination paid off for us. We lived comfortably on two incomes and enjoyed the freedom that came with not having kids. Meanwhile, my cleaning company thrived. Through hard work and strategic acquisitions, I turned it into the largest operation in the city. In the cleaning business, you hear all sorts of things from your staff. People notice more than you'd expect. For months ago, while I was going over paperwork at my desk, my secretary interrupted me to say someone was waiting for me in reception. She handed me a business card. Mark Bennett, private investigator. Intrigued, I asked her to bring him in. When Mark walked in, I greeted him with a handshake and motioned for him to sit down. "Mark Bennett," I said, reading his card again. "What brings a private investigator to my office?" After some small talk, he leaned back in his chair. "Before we get into it, do you mind if I grab a coffee? It's been a hell of a day." I signaled my secretary, and soon we had 2 steaming mugs of coffee sitting between us. Neither of us touched them. Mark wasted no time diving into his pitch. "Here's the situation, Daniel. I'm working for a client who suspects his wife is either having an affair or getting dangerously close to one. She's an accountant at Johnson Industries, and one of their suppliers is Silverstone Supplies. There's a new salesman there, Andrew Clark. He has a reputation for chasing married women, sending flowers, flirty texts, even taking them out to fancy dinners. Right now, he's trying to get her to go on an overnight trip with him." The story had a touch of drama that made me smirk, but then something clicked. Silverstone Supplies. That name sounded familiar. Of course, it was one of Rachel's vendors. My amusement turned to unease. This Andrew Clark sounded like someone I'd rather keep far away from her. I caught Mark watching me carefully, waiting for my reaction. "So," I said slowly, "what do you want from me?" Mark leaned forward with a confident grin. "Simple. This guy leaves her notes, flowers, and other personal items. She usually reads them and tosses them in the trash. Your employees handle that trash. All I'm asking is for them to pass anything from him along to us. Our legal team has cleared it, and her company has given us written authorization." He handed me a document that seemed legitimate enough. Still, I wasn't entirely convinced. Noticing my hesitation, he added, "If you want reassurance, call her CEO. His number is right there." Without saying a word, I dialed the number. The CEO answered on the second ring, skipping any kind of greeting. "Daniel," he said bluntly, "if Mark Bennett is with you, let me assure you everything is above board. You're authorized to cooperate." The CEO's call ended abruptly, leaving no room for further questions. "Our lawyer is drafting a formal letter for you," he had said, his tone brisk. "It'll be emailed shortly. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to ring me, but I must go. He's waiting in my office." And with that, The line went dead. Mark smirked, clearly unfazed. I nodded curtly and said, "Your story checks out. Let's get started. Lay out exactly what you need, and we'll make it happen. My team will bag her trash separately, and I'll review it here. You can swing by every morning at 11 to collect the findings." "Will that work?" "Perfect," Mark replied, his grin widening. Without delay, I phoned the team lead responsible for that particular office. Mark meticulously outlined what to look for: handwritten notes, flower cards, and anything hinting at private meetings or unusual lunches. My staff and I collaborated with Mark for the next 6 weeks. Near the end of that period, one of my employees informed me that the target, Mark's client's wife, had disappeared after a lunch break. I called Mark to relay the update, and he followed the woman to a motel, gathering conclusive evidence. The fallout was swift and brutal. The marriage crumbled, ending in divorce. Life returned to its usual rhythm after that. Or so I thought. A few weeks later, Rachel seemed preoccupied. She brushed off my inquiries, insisting it was nothing, but her aloofness lingered. About a week after her behavior began to change, Donna, one of my longest-standing employees, paid me a visit. Donna had worked for me almost since the beginning and was more like family than staff. At 25 years my senior, she had always treated me like a son, which made her appearance in my office feel particularly ominous. Taking a seat across from me, she looked uneasy. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "remember a few months back when we helped that investigator with the surveillance?" Curiosity piqued. I leaned back in my chair. "Of course. It's not something I'd forget easily." "Why?" Donna hesitated, her expression conflicted. Finally, she sighed and said, "I've been reassigned to Rachel's office. And I thought you should know. Andrew Clark has been visiting her there." My stomach dropped. "What exactly do you mean?" "He's left her flowers, big bouquets, and she accepted them. I even saw her take them to lunch with her," Donna continued, pulling out a card. "I thought you might want to see this." I took the card from her and read it silently. "Dear Rachel, thank you for helping me renew my contract with your company. I can't express how much I appreciate it. Let's have lunch and catch up. With love, Andrew." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. With love. It was obvious this wasn't just a professional connection. The tone, the familiarity, it all pointed to something much more personal. And this was the same man whom Mark had exposed as a predator, preying on married women. Now it seemed Rachel was his latest target. Clenching the card in my hand, I thanked Donna for bringing it to my attention. "Keep an eye on things," I instructed her. "If any more notes show up, let me know immediately." As soon as Donna left, I grabbed my phone and dialed Mark. He answered on the third ring. "Daniel, how can I help?" I wasted no time. "Donna, one of my staff, just reported that Andrew Clark is targeting my wife now. He's already sent flowers and a card, and they've been out to lunch. This needs to be handled immediately." Mark exhaled sharply on the other end of the line. "Daniel, I hate to say it, but you're not alone. Andrew Clark's name has come up twice this week. 2 other husbands are in similar situations, and they're both willing to share the costs of the investigation. Would you like to join them?" "Absolutely," I replied without hesitation. "What's the next step?" Mark suggested meeting at his office at 2 p.m. to finalize the paperwork and discuss the plan. I agreed and arrived 5 minutes early. Inside, I was introduced to the other husbands, Dan McWilliams and Johnny Ashley. Alongside Mark was his colleague, Mike Pearson, who had been gathering evidence on Andrew for weeks. Mark opened the meeting with a blunt summary. "Gentlemen, we're here because of a shared problem. Daniel, meet Dan and Johnny. They're already on board with this investigation. If you agree to join, we'll get you registered as a client and ensure information flows between all parties." The 2 men gave their approval, and within 15 minutes, I had signed the necessary forms and fronted $5,000 using a personal credit card, an amount Rachel wouldn't see in any statements. Mark turned his attention back to the group. "Here's what we know. Andrew Clark has a routine. He showers women with attention at work, flowers, messages, lunch invites, and gradually pressures them into crossing boundaries. For childless women, he plays on their independence, convincing them they deserve free passes. With mothers, he preys on their exhaustion, presenting himself as an escape. His endgame is always the same: a hotel room, followed by abandonment. Over the last year, he's caused at least 5 divorces locally. Before this, he worked in Dallas, where he was sued by 7 husbands in a class action case for alienation of affection. He's a predator, plain and simple. Mark paused for a sip of coffee. Daniel, just to clarify, are you cleaning at Johnson Industries or any school district offices where Andrew might be active? No, y replica firmly. Neither. That's unfortunate, but no matter. Keep collecting anything you find in Rachel's trash. One more thing. Who pays for her phone bill? My business does, I said. Mark smiled knowingly. What's her number? I replied flatly. Sure, I'll complete the form. Mark slid a document toward me along with a QR code. Scan this on her phone, he explained. It'll direct you to our secure server. Use the provided username and password, and the program will install itself discreetly. It'll transmit all calls, messages, emails, and WhatsApp chats directly to us. We're aware Andrew typically uses mobile phones to avoid complications like spouses accidentally answering calls on landlines. The meeting wrapped up with Dan, Johnny, and me exchanging phone numbers and creating a WhatsApp group that included Mark and Mike for seamless updates. With plans in motion, I returned home, where Rachel was already there, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. She was visibly distracted, her responses to our conversation vague and curt. At one point, she left to feed the dog but took her phone with her, something she had never done before. When I asked about her day, she merely muttered that it had been tiring and retired to bed before 9:30, much earlier than usual. Later that night, I stayed up, waiting until she was asleep before searching for her phone. To my surprise, it wasn't in its usual spot on the bedside table. I crept into the bedroom and saw the faint glimmer of a charging cable near her pillow. Retrieving the phone without waking her was out of the question, so I resigned myself to waiting. My mind raced as I lay there, troubled by her secrecy. At around 2 a.m., she stirred and got out of bed, giving me the perfect opportunity. I quickly scanned the QR code, input the credentials, and returned the phone to its exact spot before she came back. The next morning, her behavior was no less erratic. She wandered aimlessly around the house, avoiding eye contact. When I asked about her plans, she dodged the question and left for work without much of a goodbye. At 11:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Mike calling from Mark's office. "We've finished analyzing the initial data from Rachel's phone," he began. "The situation's worse than we thought. She's created a separate email account solely for her communication with Andrew. It's actually a lucky break for us, because it simplifies tracking their exchanges." "What did you find?" I asked, steeling myself for the worst. Mike sighed. "His messages are relentless. He's manipulating her emotionally, making her question your entire relationship. He's coerced her into confiding details about your private life, including your intimacy. He's weaponized that information, hinting at how to spice things up and pushing for a weekend rendezvous. During their last lunch, he likely proposed it outright." The weight of Mike's words sank in. "Are they still in contact? Have they made plans?" Mike paused as he reviewed the messages. "There's one from this morning. Andrew suggested lunch at the beach club tomorrow to strategize. He told her, 'Daniel loves you, so this won't be considered cheating. He can't deny you a free pass.'" Her response? "Okay." I clenched my jaw. Unbelievable. Mike continued. "Her behavior lines up with someone deeply conflicted. It's clear she's wrestling with guilt, but Andrew's relentless. If you don't step in now, he'll escalate. It's only a matter of time before he books a motel." That was my breaking point. "I need to act," I said, my voice firm. "Talking to her won't cut it. He'll just find another way. If this continues, I'll have no choice but to end our marriage." Mike agreed. "If you're considering divorce, it's wise to prepare. But Andrew's ego won't let her go easily, even if you confront her. I suggest taking decisive action before he pulls her further into his web." We ended the call, and I immediately reached out to my attorney. "We need to talk," I told him. He scheduled a meeting for the following morning at 9:30. When I arrived, he greeted me with a knowing look. "Something's up," he said, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. "Spill it." I took a sip and laid it all out. Rachel's on the verge of betraying me. This Andrew Clark has been pursuing her, and she's taken the bait. I need to prepare for the worst. If she cheats, I'm filing for divorce, no questions asked. My attorney nodded, jotting down notes. You've already safeguarded the business with that trust agreement, so that'll remain intact. Without kids, child support won't be an issue, and the house can be sold. Do you plan on pursuing legal action against him or his employer? No, I said decisively. It's a waste of time and money. We finalized a strategy, and as I left, he assured me the necessary documents would be ready when needed. Throughout the week, Rachel's behavior swung wildly. One day affectionate, the next cold and distant. On Friday afternoon, Donna called with more news. Daniel, she got another bouquet today along with a postcard. I didn't need to hear the rest. Thanks, Donna, I said grimly. I messaged the group chat to inform them. Moments later, Mike responded, I'll check her email now. 5 minutes passed before my phone rang. Daniel, Mike said, check WhatsApp. I opened the app and found a forwarded document, a hotel reservation. My stomach dropped as I read it. A double room booked for Friday and Saturday at a lakeside hotel just 30 minutes outside the city. The names? Andrew Clark and Rachel Harris. Back on the call, Mike's tone was somber. It gets worse. Her email contains a cheater's guide. She's detailing what to say and do, almost like she's justifying her actions. Send me everything, I said, my voice cold. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a deliberate, calculated act. As the email landed in my inbox, I braced myself and began reading. The subject line, weekend, carried a sickening weight, and the chain of messages only made things worse. About 2 weeks ago, Andrew had sent Rachel a link to the same hotel he eventually booked. His words dripped with manipulation, promising to pamper her and suggesting entertainment ideas for their time together. He followed up with probing emails, asking for her thoughts and lamenting my supposed inability to make her happy. In the final email, he provided the hotel reservation details and outlined a manipulative script, essentially a guide for convincing me to let her go through with it. The plan was devious. She was to cook me a lavish dinner on Thursday, engage in frequent intimacy throughout the week, and present the arrangement as a harmless, purely physical encounter meant to enhance our marriage. He even appealed to her emotions, leaving the final decision in her hands while subtly ensuring it leaned in his favor. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. He was preying on her doubts and insecurities, twisting her perception of love and loyalty. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move, but there was no denying the gravity of the situation. That weekend, I found myself in a surreal haze. Rachel displayed an unusual kindness, which only added to the unease. On Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday night, and even Sunday afternoon, she initiated intimacy. By Monday morning, we had another brief encounter. To an outsider, it would have seemed like a renewed connection between husband and wife. But for me, it felt hollow, her actions tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. On Monday afternoon, Ross called at 3 o'clock with grim updates. Daniel, he began, his tone heavy. She sent Andrew an email this morning with a proposition. She told him Thursday night is his window. If he agrees, she'll go through with it. If not, she claims she won't pursue it further. I clenched my fist as Ross continued. She ended the email with a line aimed to ease his nerves. Remember, seeking forgiveness is easier than asking permission. I thanked Ross for his diligence and asked him to prepare a comprehensive folder with all the evidence. He confirmed he'd include a photograph of Rachel and Andrew together, a candid but unmistakable image of them kissing. Though it wasn't overtly passionate, it was damning enough. I instructed him to make that photo the cover page and send the complete package to my attorney. After hanging up, I immediately contacted my lawyer, alerting him to expect the folder. We agreed to meet over breakfast on Saturday morning to finalize the divorce petition. Few things ruin a morning like a divorce notice, I quipped bitterly. That night, Rachel approached me with affection, but I declined, claiming I had work to do. I stayed in my office until 2 a.m., avoiding her completely. When I finally went to bed, she was fast asleep, Despite the tension, I slept deeply, waking early to head into work. Before she could make any advances, a courier arrived, delivering the folder of evidence from Ross. Sitting alone in my office, I went through the contents carefully. The documents painted a vivid, damning picture. Andrew had perfected his method of seduction, and Rachel had fallen right into his trap. Ross had even included accounts of Andrew's other conquests, detailing at least 7 marriages he had dismantled in the past year and a half. One particularly distressing note from Dan described a scene at the holiday in where his wife had broken down in tears, leading Ross to intervene. Dan and his wife had started counseling to salvage their marriage, but the scars were deep. As I read, my secretary, Kathy Atwood, entered. She was visibly emotional, her concern evident. For the first time, I confided in her, recounting the entire situation. Her reaction surprised me. Not just sympathy, but a fierceness I hadn't expected. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with conviction. For the first time in days, I smiled, realizing how much of a friend she had become. I also noticed something I hadn't before, her undeniable charm. Returning her smile, I said, "If she leaves with him on Friday, she'll find divorce papers at the hotel on Saturday. No second chances." Kathy gave me a mischievous grin and said, "What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Why not take your own weekend with someone who appreciates you?" Her meaning was clear, and while I chuckled at her audacity, the idea lingered. By Tuesday night, I went through the motions with Rachel, engaging in intimacy without any real emotion. Wednesday morning passed with little interaction, though by the evening, the tension between us had eased slightly. On Thursday morning, as I left the house, Rachel called after me, shouting something about dinner. I ignored her, heading straight to the store to buy ingredients for a meal I had no intention of enjoying. By 2:30 that afternoon, I had prepared chicken, potatoes, and vegetables for baking, along with a bottle of her favorite white wine. When Rachel arrived home with shopping bags in hand, she looked puzzled. "What's this?" she asked. I gave her a broad smile. "Just making dinner for my dear wife. I thought it would be nice to have a special evening before we sit down for a chat." Her expression faltered. "Oh, I was going to cook dinner too," she said, feigning nonchalance. "But after we eat, there's something important I want to discuss." "Of course," I replied, my smile unwavering. "It'll be a long night." Dinner was tense, but I kept the conversation flowing, skillfully deflecting any attempts to shift the focus onto me. Once we finished, I took the lead. "Bring your wine to the kitchen. We could talk there," I said. She followed hesitantly, and I guided her to the table, where I had discreetly placed a folder beneath a stack of magazines. Removing the magazines, I revealed the incriminating document. Her face drained of color. "Rachel," I began calmly, "you know I love you and never want to hurt you. But lately, I've realized we married young, and I lacked certain experiences. My new secretary, Kathy, has been a source of clarity. Her stories captivate me, and now I feel I need to clear my mind before committing to the rest of our lives together." Her eyes widened in horror as I continued. "I've arranged a hotel stay with her this weekend. It'll be purely physical, an opportunity to blow off steam and learn some new things to bring back to you. I'm sharing this with you, so it won't be seen as betrayal." Rachel's face turned crimson, her voice trembling with rage. "Over my dead body. And that woman is gone by Monday or we're finished." Her reaction broke the tension. I laughed, leaning back in my chair. "Your expression is priceless." Her face shifted from rage to shock as realization set in. Every response she had rehearsed, every excuse she had planned to give, I had anticipated and dismantled. I closed the folder, turned it around, and handed it to her, ensuring the photograph of her kissing Andrew Clark was clearly visible on the cover. Her complexion turned ashen as she whispered, "You knew, and you played me." I leaned back in my chair, a small, bitter smile on my face. "Yes, I knew. And your reaction, just now? That's exactly how I would have felt if the roles were reversed. The difference is, Rachel, unlike you, I didn't book a hotel. Unlike you, Miss Atwood and I never shared lunches, kisses, or intimate conversations. My story was a fabrication. Yours, however, is all too real." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the folder, her fury growing with every page. Dates, times, photographs, emails, call transcripts. It was all there, a damning dossier of her betrayal. "You violated my privacy," she finally screamed. "You spied on me, followed me, invaded my personal life. How could you?" Her attempt to turn the tables didn't faze me. "You plan a weekend with another man. You lied to my face, humiliated me, and jeopardized our marriage. And now you're angry at me for finding out." My tone remained calm, but carried the weight of my frustration. "Rachel, I love you, but there's a boundary you've crossed. You got yourself a boyfriend, engaged in an emotional affair, and plotted to take it physical. If that's not a betrayal, I don't know what is." Tears welled in her eyes, but her anger didn't wane. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she stammered. This wasn't supposed to be about us. It was separate." I scoffed. "Separate? Do you hear yourself, Rachel? You're quoting straight from the infidelity playbook. But let me remind you when I said something similar. Over my dead body. You reacted with outrage. So why is it acceptable for you to cheat, but not for me?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I raised a hand to cut her off. "There's no such thing as a free pass. If you go through with this, it's cheating. Whether you tell me about it beforehand or not doesn't change the reality of what it is." Her gaze dropped to the floor. I can't process this right now. I need to be alone," she mumbled before grabbing the folder and retreating upstairs. Moments later, I heard the bedroom door shut and the lock click into place. I sat at the table for a while, staring at the empty wine glasses and the remnants of our tense dinner. Finally, I tidied up the kitchen, my mind racing. Ross had provided me with a tablet to monitor Rachel's phone activity through the server. Logging in, I scrolled through her recent messages to Andrew. One caught my eye, a message detailing her growing concerns. In her message, she wrote about how someone was following them and seemed to have copies of their communications. She described the dinner I had prepared, my calm demeanor, and the folder I'd shown her. Her anger toward me was palpable, but Andrew's response was worse. He dismissed her fears, urging her to proceed with their plan, doubling down on their love, and insisting that if she truly cared about me, she'd see the weekend as harmless. I read on, each message deepening my resolve. Andrew suggested she pack a bag and bring it to work to gauge my reaction. If I didn't object, they'd go through with their plan, and if I pushed back, they'd regroup. He promised her that they could always seek forgiveness later. I set the tablet aside, unable to stomach any more. The decision was made. I would proceed with the divorce. Waiting for them to physically consummate the affair was no longer necessary. The betrayal was undeniable, and there was no coming back from it. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I confronted her. I said, "And she's still planning to test me by packing her bag tomorrow. I don't want to file for divorce until she crosses the final line, but I need her to know how serious this is." He paused thoughtfully before replying. "We could draft a preliminary claim. It won't be an official filing, but will clearly outline your awareness of her actions and the consequences. It'll show her just how far you're willing to go." I agreed, and we began drafting the document. It wasn't about playing games anymore. It was about protecting my dignity, my future, and my sense of self-worth. This wasn't just about Rachel's betrayal. It was about reclaiming control of my life. The lawyer and I finalized the letter, its tone firm but not hostile. It laid out the details of her actions, the potential consequences, and the clear intent to file for divorce if she followed through with her weekend plans. I suggested delivering it to her office, preferably with Andrew Clark present. It wasn't just to rattle her, but to solidify the seriousness of the situation. The lawyer agreed it was a strong approach. He also noted that her employer, traditional and strict, would likely disapprove of her behavior, especially if the drama unfolded publicly. By mid-morning, the lawyer sent me a polished draft of the letter. It was perfect, concise, and undeniably serious. I confirmed my approval and instructed him to proceed. Afterward, I checked the tablet for updates. There were no further messages between Rachel and Clark, so I decided to retire for the night. When I tried to enter the bedroom, I assumed it would be locked, but it wasn't. Rachel was lying in bed, her expression expectant, as though she thought a romantic encounter might smooth things over. Against the wall, her packed bag was clearly visible. The sight of it enraged me. "So, you've chosen a quick rendezvous with Clark over our marriage," I said coldly, motioning to the bag. Without waiting for her response, I turned and left, ignoring her pleas as I made my way to the guest room. Lying down fully clothed, I tried to process everything. Her actions felt like a knife to the chest, a betrayal that pierced deeper than I could have imagined. Despite my best efforts to remain composed, tears streamed down my face as grief and a profound sense of loss overwhelmed me. Morning came, and I heard her descending the stairs. I waited until I was sure she was occupied before heading to the bedroom to shower and change. When I emerged, I noticed her bag was gone. Had she packed it in the car? Had she reconsidered? The uncertainty was maddening. The scent of coffee and bacon wafted through the house, and I headed to the kitchen. Rachel was there, nervously glancing at me. Her attempt at breakfast felt like a hollow gesture. I took a breath and decided to be direct. "This spread you've prepared, what is it? An attempt to convince me of the kind of wife you'll be after sleeping with another man?" My voice was steady but cold. "It won't work. If you go through with this, our marriage is over." Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. I continued. "My lawyer and I have already arranged for the divorce papers to be served tomorrow morning at the hotel. Once they're delivered, there's no taking them back. No forgiveness. If you come home tonight, we'll start counseling and work toward rebuilding trust. But if you leave with him, don't bother coming back. You're not welcome here." She looked as though she wanted to argue, but instead turned away, confirming my suspicions. "I assume your bag's already in the car," I added. Rachel flinched at my words but didn't deny it. Without another word, I left the house. Her silence spoke volumes. She understood the gravity of her actions, but still seemed determined to test me. At the office, my secretary, Kathy, greeted me with concern. "You look terrible," she said, handing me a fresh cup of coffee. I gave her a faint smile. "And you look as stunning as ever." She raised an eyebrow, clearly wanting to ask what had happened. Anticipating her question, I added, "Plan B went exactly as expected." She flew into a rage, demanded I fire you. "Over my dead body," she said. Then, this morning, she packed her weekend bag. At 11 o'clock, she'll get the letter. Let's see if it rattles her. Kathy set her hand gently on mine. "I hope she comes to her senses. Surely she knows this behavior isn't acceptable, especially if she thinks it's fine for her, but not for you." I nodded, offering her a sad smile. The rest of the morning dragged by. My productivity was non-existent as I waited for updates. Finally, at 11:15, my phone rang. It was Rachel, and her voice was choked with tears. "Are you serious? Are you really going to divorce me?" she sobbed, the words barely audible. "Of course," I replied calmly. "If you betray me, it's a breach of our agreement. You'd divorce me if I cheated, wouldn't you?" Her answer was faint but firm. "Yes." "Then you already know my answer," I said. "You crossed a line, Rachel. Actions have consequences." She hesitated before pleading, "Will you come home to talk?" I glanced at the clock. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I replied curtly and ended the call. When I arrived home, the house was quiet. The smell of coffee and bacon from earlier lingered, but the atmosphere was heavy. I brewed myself a fresh pot and sat at the kitchen table. Rachel arrived shortly after, clutching an envelope from my lawyer in one hand and her weekend bag slung over her shoulder. She froze in the doorway, staring at me, her face pale and stricken. Rachel hesitated in the doorway, her eyes darting between me and the envelope in her trembling hand. It was clear she wanted to rush toward me, perhaps to embrace me, but uncertainty rooted her in place. I carried my coffee to the table, gesturing for her to sit. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, finally settling across from me. My first question was blunt. "So, are you still planning to go to the hotel?" She recoiled as if struck. "How can you even ask that after sending this?" She held up the letter with trembling fingers. "Of course, I'm not going. I love you, Lou. I want to be with you. I know you'd never allow it, so everything is canceled." Her words tumbled out in a rush, a mixture of defiance and desperation. Now, do we need to mend our marriage, or will I still be served? Her voice cracked as she lowered her gaze. I leaned forward, reaching across the table to gently lift her chin, forcing her to meet my eyes. You'll only be served if you show up at the hotel. No hotel, no papers, I said calmly. However, our marriage has been deeply damaged, Rachel. This isn't something we can brush aside. If we're going to move forward, here's what needs to happen. She nodded, her eyes locked on mine, tears pooling at the corners. I laid out the plan firmly, but without malice. First, you're going to call Clark in my presence. I want to hear you tell him that everything is off. Then, you'll delete your personal email account, the one you use to communicate with him. Afterward, you'll contact your boss and inform him of Clark's behavior. Request that he be permanently barred from your office. Finally, we'll arrange counseling to understand why this happened, why you thought I'd agree to something like this, and how we can rebuild trust. Before she could respond, her phone rang, its screen lighting up with Clark's name. She hesitated for only a moment before taking a deep breath and putting the call on speaker. Where are you, Rachel? His voice was sharp, impatient. I'm waiting for you at the reception and can't wait any longer. Rachel's hands shook, but her voice remained steady. Alistair, I'm back home with Lou. Something he did shook me to my core. If I go with you, my marriage will be destroyed. I'm sorry. You're not worth it. That's why I'm not going. There was a moment of stunned silence before his rage erupted. You foolish cow, he spat. Do you have any idea how much time, effort, and money I've wasted on you? And now you're backing out because some weakling played hurt feelings? You're pathetic. Screw you. The line went dead, and for the first time, Rachel saw him for what he truly was, a selfish manipulator. Her expression shifted from guilt to resolve. Without prompting, she deactivated and deleted the email account they had used to communicate, though the process took nearly an hour. Just as we finished, there was a knock at the door. Standing on the doorstep were her boss and the HR manager, Marvin Woods. Their expressions were stern, but not unkind. Marvin spoke first. Rachel, we're aware of what happened today. To say we're displeased is an understatement. However, we're here to offer you an opportunity to retain your job. Please explain what transpired. Rachel dabbed her eyes with a tissue before speaking. About 3 months ago, AM Metals assigned our account to a new salesman, Alistair Clark. At first, he seemed professional, but then he started visiting me daily, complimenting my appearance. It escalated to comments about my figure, sending flowers, chocolates, and eventually inviting me to dinner. Foolishly, I accepted. During dinner, he asked deeply personal questions about my life, my husband, even our intimacy. He belittled my husband, claimed Lou was unworthy of me, and eventually proposed a weekend getaway. She paused, her voice trembling. Luckily, Lou intervened. He gave me a letter stating he'd divorce me if I went through with it, and it snapped me out of it. I informed Alistair that I wouldn't go, and that Lou and I were working to save our marriage. I intended to report the incident formally, so I'm grateful you're here. Marvin exchanged a glance with her boss, who nodded before addressing Rachel. We appreciate your honesty. Yes, this was a significant error, and you're fortunate to retain your position. That said, AM Metals has been under scrutiny for the quality of their products, so we'll be terminating the account. Clark will no longer have access to this office. However, if there's ever a repeat of such behavior on your part, you'll be dismissed. Is that understood? Rachel nodded meekly. Yes, sir. With that, they left, and the weight of the confrontation seemed to lift slightly. We sat down to a quiet lunch, and then began searching for a marriage counselor. Fortunately, we found one quickly and scheduled an appointment for the following day. The next morning, as we sat in the counselor's office, Rachel admitted that Clark had preyed on her fears, that our life had become dull and routine. She realized she had unknowingly provided him with the ammunition to manipulate her. For my part, I learned to see Clark's actions as part of a calculated game, but also to appreciate the richness of the life Rachel and I had built together. The counseling sessions spanned 3 months, helping us rebuild trust and rediscover the love that had once seemed lost. 4 years later, we're still together, stronger than ever, and Rachel is expecting our first child. As for Clark, He had a nasty fall at the local shopping center while descending the stairs to the parking lot. The circumstances remain a mystery, though several husbands known to despise him were present that day, all wearing black caps and blending into the crowd. Despite police efforts, no one revealed any details. In the end, justice may have been poetic, but for Rachel and me, the greatest victory was finding our way back to each other.